The following presentation is brought to you by Regroup Mass Notification.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Burns and I'm the Partnership Manager at Regroup Mass Notification. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar, which is Safety Best Practices for Larger Venues and Stadiums. The webinar is presented by Regroup and our special guest, Richard Moorman. Richard is President and CEO of Concentric Risk Solutions and an expert in special event security management. Before I hand it over to Richard, I want to mention that we'll have some information at the end of the webinar regarding free one-on-one sessions that you can arrange with Richard or with Regroup specific to your organization's security management or mass notification needs. Also, we'll end with a brief Q&A session, so if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to post them in the GoToWebinar chat box. With that, I want to hand it over to Richard. I'm going to pass him over the controls. Richard?
Well, first off, I'd like to thank Chris and Regroup for inviting me to share this important information with you today. Chris, you may have to go ahead and advance the screen. I haven't got yet control. Okay, next slide, please. So our goal today is to really give you an overview of current best practices for safety and effectively planning and managing security for large events. Obviously, in the time we have today, we cannot cover everything possible, but I think, if you go to the next slide, please, the objectives, planning and preparedness, threats and hazards, risk management, event security, resources, and mass notification. Those are the topics we're going to touch on today, and I think this will give you a good, solid foundation for planning safe and secure events, and that's really a hot topic today, as we all know. Next slide, please. So, post 9/11. So the tragic terrorism incidents on 9/11 in 2001 changed the way we all looked at security planning and management forever. And that's one of those incidents that we all remember where we were at, what we were doing when it occurred. But you know, prior to 9/11, those of us that were involved in planning and managing sports and special events security, we primarily focused on traffic and crowd management. And we had to plan for an occasional weather type of incident. So that really changed the way we looked at things, and it continues to evolve. The incidents that happened after that, like the Boston Marathon, we continued to try to improve. And then the most recent events that's happened not only around the world, but also in this country. And going back to 9/11 just for a second, right after that, the federal government formed the Department of Homeland Security, and they identified sports as specifically in 2002, they had, and this is now open source information, that Al-Qaeda had planned to disrupt or maybe even bomb an large open air stadium. They looked at that as an attractive target. Next slide, please. So I think it's important really to give you some definitions in the beginning, because especially event versus incident, these terms are often used to mean the same thing or interchangeably, but they're not really. I want you to think of an event as something like today. It's planned and scheduled, a planned and scheduled activity. And an incident is something that's unplanned. It's either natural, technological, or human caused, and we'll talk more about all hazards here in a little bit, but it's a situation that warrants some sort of emergency response. And obviously, you can have a large event and several small incidents along the way that maybe don't really impact the whole event or overwhelm it, but you do need, in your planning, to have something in place in case this incident actually takes over the event. Next slide, please. So, special event. So, give out one of the resources early on here. There's an excellent free, I said free, FEMA course, IS-15, Special Events Contingency Planning, and FEMA actually defined special event a little bit further. So they said it's a scheduled, planned, non-routine activity within a community where a large number of people are brought together to watch or participate. And that's just a small portion of that definition. But when you think about it, special events sometimes in a community really overwhelm the community. You may have a venue, either your stadium and arena, which has continuity. If you're a university, you may have NCAA football on a regular basis every season. But then you might decide to start having concerts. Well, that's a whole different demographics you're bringing in. So it's important to know these different definitions. Next slide, please. So I get asked this question quite often. What's a national special security event, and how do I get my event designated as such? There's only been about in the history of this, and it was put together by Presidential Policy Directive 15 in 1998, and it established the National Special Security Event, and it's now designated by the Secretary of Homeland Security. And the types of events that get this designation are, most recently, it's been the Republican National Convention, the Democratic National Convention, the 2017 presidential inauguration, and I believe even the 2017 President's Address to the Joint Session of Congress were all designated as National Special Security Events. And as such, it gives the United States Secret Service the authority to plan the event. The FBI is responsible for the counterterrorism piece, any type of hostage rescue or investigation that needs to be completed. And then FEMA is actually responsible for the recovery planning, the recovery management. This is not to say it doesn't also alleviate the local authorities. So if you're hosting this event, it's really going to tax and exhaust your resources, and it's going to be a financial burden for you too. So just wanted to give you an example of that. And then there's another, if you advance the slide, please. Okay, so special event assessment rating, SEER. Now this is something that you can apply for. SEER events are pre-planned special events. They're below the level of that National Special Security event, and they're submitted each year to the Homeland Security. The majority of these types of events are events that are managed by the state, local government, or local venue that's hosting, but may require some sort of augmentation from the federal government, such as, good example is a SEER level 1. So there's 5 levels, 1 through 5. Number 1 being the highest priority level, which gets the most attention. And an example of that is the Super Bowl, where on the other hand, SEER level 5 is the lowest. I've been involved in some planning and managing SEER level 4 events where we did not get any financial assistance from the federal government, but we did get resources, equipment, and personnel. So that's something to look at. I would recommend you contact your local Homeland Security representative, or maybe the local FBI if you have a major event that you might think meets this criteria. That's just another resource. Okay, now let's start to get into planning. So Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. And that is really true. I don't know how many places I've been around the country, and I've had the opportunity to travel around and look at different venues, both privately owned venues, publicly owned venues, and analyze different events and assess different events. And oftentimes, when somebody has a reoccurring event, they have a plan that they've had for a very long time. Maybe it's an evacuation plan, and they've never had to use it, so just kind of sit there and collect dust. That's really failing the plan too. You should be continually updating that. We'll talk more about that here in a second. Next slide. So, planning starts at pre-event planning, and that's really intended to assist you in developing a game day or an event operations plan. And this plan could be compared to an incident action plan. So if you're familiar with NIMS and ICS, which will give you some definitions of what they are if you're not familiar, but you can use their planning mechanism, which was initially designed incident action plan, to quickly help you manage and plan to manage some incident. Again, remember the definition of an incident, something that's happened that's going to require an emergency response. But you can also use that in your pre-event planning. And if you have an event, you should be planning out as far in advance as you can. So pre-event planning is just intended to assist you in developing that game day or the event operations plan. So more about planning. So regardless of the type of event you're going to have, you need to identify the stakeholders. And what I mean by stakeholders is anybody that has a functional stake in the event. And where I see the most neglected area is people don't consider the surrounding communities. So if you're having a large event, it's going to impact your neighbors. So, and this is especially true in events where it's a temporary type of event, like an outside, like a street fair or something like that. Usually arenas and stadiums, you don't run into this unless, again, it's a different type of event. If you have a stadium and you have football games during the fall every Saturday, fairly much at the same time, that doesn't really impact the community. But if you end up having maybe a rock concert in that stadium, it's a multi-day with camping, that's really going to impact the surrounding community. So just keep that in mind. Consideration needs to be given to those areas around you, and you need to include them in the planning phase. At the start of the process, it's very important to identify the lead agency and who's in charge. This helps avoid confusion and consternation later on. And I've been involved in projects where that happens. So you're a university, you're hosting some event, it's really going to impact the city surrounding you. They get involved late. You don't maybe get the good resources you need. Everybody doesn't play very well along. It's just very important in the planning phase to identify who's the lead agency, who's in charge. And this just really helps to avoid that confusion and consternation. So I mentioned the NIMS ICS, that's the National Incident Management System, Incident Command System, and this can really be utilized in the planning process. What I'm seeing more and more is those event planners, event operations, facility operations individuals that they're going out and getting this training now. It's really helping them because they would go to the table, sit down with public safety individuals that's had the NIMS ICS courses, and they would be lost. Like, what are you talking about? I've had the opportunity, I teach a couple of Homeland Security FEMA classes around the country, and the concept is to get everybody, not just public safety, but your event operations, your facilities operations folks, anybody involved in this special event together at the same table to go through this training, and you start talking about NIMS ICS, and they're really lost. So it's very important that those individuals seek out this training. And because security is everybody's responsibility, and we'll get a little bit more into that here in a minute. But what NIMS gives you is unified command for events that require use of multiple agencies. You have to identify a command post, and of course that command post should not be located in the venue. Just think about this. So if something happens to the venue and you have all your command personnel in there, all the public safety, maybe all your event managers are in that arena or stadium command post, and something happens to it, who's going to manage the event? It could be disastrous. I always recommend that it be located off-site somewhere. And in addition to that, the Emergency Operations Center, EOC, should be utilized. What I see often is that a local Emergency Operations Center will be set up but not staffed during the event. I say, what better way, if nothing happens, great, but that gives you an opportunity to at least get some practical experience. So the Emergency Operations Center is set up and to be utilized, staffed, and it's just good practical on-the-job training, so to speak. So, planning. You have to plan the plan, staff the plan, train the plan, practice a plan, and review and adjust the plan. And what we mean by plan the plan, you get your planning formulated, you've identified your stakeholders, you've identified the lead agency, the stakeholders, You start planning, you get your plan together, you start identifying what kind of staffing levels you're going to need. Once you get that identified, then those individuals need to be trained on the plan. I don't know how many times I've seen venues during an assessment of a special event, and you interview people and they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. Well, I'm supposed to watch this door. I'm not allowing anybody to get through it. Well, then you ask, what happens if you have to evacuate somebody? And they give you this blank look. So it's very important that anybody involved in working the event is trained on what the plan is. And then you should practice the plan. Give it a run-through of some sort. You know, maybe just a tabletop exercise where it's just discussion-based, you know. And then you review and adjust the plan. And if you have multiple events, again, using that football every Saturday analogy, that gives you a chance to practice that plan and tweak that plan. And then you just need to review and adjust. And I'm a big proponent of having an after-action report, regardless of what type of an event it is. And that after-action just talks about what went right, what went wrong, what could we do better. And then that needs to be documented, and then you can use that to review and adjust the plan. So this whole planning process should be a continuous improvement. So now let's talk a little bit about threats and hazards. So this is the FEMA definition of all hazards, and they define that as natural, technological, or human-caused incidents that warrant action to protect life, property, environment, and public health or safety, and to minimize disruptions of activities. So natural type of hazard obviously is the weather, and that's probably our most likely hazard. Technological hazard could be a cyber failure, your system goes down, power failures. I've been involved in events where the complete power would go off, the lights go dark, or maybe just something like the PA system goes down. Now, if it's a sporting event, oftentimes that may not impact the play on the field or the court if the public address system's down, but you should be thinking about what's your backup plan for that. And then you have human-caused hazards. The human cause could be something that's criminal in nature, or it could be just human error. Somebody forgot to do something. So keep this all-hazard approach in mind. So one place to start when you do your hazard and vulnerability assessment is look at your community's vulnerability to specific hazards. More than likely, your local emergency management agency, and it varies from state to state how it's set up. Most states have at least at a minimum a county emergency management agency, and they have most likely already conducted a hazard vulnerability assessment for that area. You should take a look at that. You can build off that for your specific event. More likely, it's going to give you a historical perspective on weather-related events. And if you're planning some event outdoors in an open-air venue, and you look at their hazard vulnerability assessment, and it shows you that, hey, every year at this time that you're planning the event, they have severe weather, then you might want to rethink and maybe reschedule to a different day. That's a good starting point, a hazard vulnerability assessment. And there are tools out there, free tools available through DHS that you can do a hazard vulnerability assessment on your own for your own venue. So I'd like to mention one of those resources that could help you, and this is another free resource, and it's available to download online. Make sure you want to get the most recent edition, which is 2013. That's the Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment Guide, and this is a Homeland Security product. It's commonly referred to as a THIRA. That would just provide you with a process that you can use to help identify and understand risk, and it outlines, a 4-step process to help you with that threat and hazard assessment. And this is just an overview of that process. Really, 4 steps helps you identify those threats and hazards. And really identify the threats and hazards of concern. You list them, give them some sort of context. And oftentimes that's going to be based on historical information. Step 3, establish capability targets and then apply the results. A simple 4-step process. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to download that guide, and that'll give you a better overview of what that process is all about. So now let's talk about risk management. So up on the screen, that's a standard risk management formula. Risk equals threat times vulnerability times consequence. So when I'm presenting in front of a live audience, so to speak, that's participative, I guess, I always ask which one of these is the most easiest to control. So just take a few seconds and think about that. So risk equals threat times vulnerability times consequence. Sometimes you see consequence as criticality, kind of the same thing, but which is easier to control? Think about that for a few seconds. So if you thought vulnerability, you're right. That's easiest to control because we can harden the target to reduce the risk. Oftentimes, as we're seeing, the threat is unknown. Whether it's similar to, think back about the Boston Marathon bombing. Those individuals was not on anybody's radar. There was no intelligence out there, so that threat was unknown. And we're seeing more and more about the radicalized individual, the lone wolf, and I think that's a trend that's going to keep trending and very concerning. So a little bit more about risk management. So the Department of Homeland Security defines 4 risk management strategies. They're up on your screen. As is International, which is a security group, used to stand for American Society of Security, is now a nationwide or international group of security professionals. Also use these same 4 definitions. So think about risk avoidance. So basically, you can avoid it altogether by not having the event. So if you get an event, somebody wants to use your venue for some event, you start looking at it, doing your due diligence and find, boy, this is a great risk, and I don't know if I could put enough stuff in place to mitigate this. So one way is you just avoid it altogether. You don't have the event. So risk control, and that's really any measure that modifies the risk. So it could be policy and procedure, practice, process that you put in place for this particular event, or some device or method that you modify the risk. Say, you hear a lot about vehicle ramming right now, and that has happened around the world and actually in this country. So you put barricades up to avoid that. So that's controlling the risk in some sort of fashion. And then risk transfer, number 3, that's something that we all do. We all have automobiles and homes, and we have insurance on them. So think insurance. So oftentimes there's an insurance policy. Even different music groups I'm familiar with, that they'll have an insurance policy in case their outside show gets canceled. Oftentimes a promoter that's putting on a show may have an insurance policy to cover certain things. So that's just risk transfer. And then lastly is risk acceptance. So basically you're accepting the risk because the cost of managing a certain type of risk is accepted. It might be too much, so you accept the risk. The risk is not maybe adequate enough to warrant the cost to manage it. So these are things that some of my security consulting clients ask me about all the time when you're talking about risk. Oftentimes, and I'm sure folks on this webinar can relate to this and probably have even heard this before from the people they have to answer to, is why does this cost so much and what costs less? Well, doing nothing is the least costly, but it brings the greatest risk. If you use some sort of a reasonable mitigation measure, some risk control measures, there's going to be some cost involved, and you're going to reduce that risk somewhat. And then, of course, the lowest risk is going to bring the greatest cost because you're hardening the target and you're going to spend more money on security, either equipment or staffing. So just keep these in mind. I have used this for people that I had to answer to before. Well, if you don't want to pay for it, that's going to bring a lot of risk. And are you willing to accept that risk? So now we want to get into more of the event security, and this is kind of one of the main reasons we're here is to talk about this. And so just keep in mind when thinking about event security, you need to take a holistic approach and keep the components of security in mind, and that's personnel security, information security, and physical security. So it's just not about physical security, but they all are intertwined. They all have to work together. So as you're thinking about event security, you need to think about what are you protecting, why are you protecting it, how will you protect it, and then what's the likelihood that something's going to happen, and what's the plan if something does happen. That sounds simple, but what are you protecting, why are you protecting it, how will you protect it, what's the likelihood that something will happen, and what is the plan if something does happen. And the likelihood piece all goes about that threat and hazard vulnerability assessment and risk management. And oftentimes, weather is easy to do a threat and hazard vulnerability assessment on because we usually have a lot of historical information that will help us determine what the likelihood may be, where a terrorism type of threat, we don't. But think about this, they are becoming more and more common. And so that's something that really has to be factored in. Don't let somebody tell you, if you're thought in planning security for an event, that, oh, that's not going to happen here, because it may just very well happen. And then you have to have that plan. What is the plan if something does happen? Another important thing to think about is your temporary workforce. So oftentimes, even if it's a reoccurring event, it's baseball season and you're going to have, it seems like they play baseball almost every day, you're still bringing together a temporary workforce. And you need to know who is in your venue and who's working. All personnel should be screened, some sort of screening, pre-employment background type of check, and also a training needs assessment, and that should be part of your planning, your training plan. And then I highly recommend a job description for each of those positions, which includes some sort of post orders, and that should be right in the job description. And I mentioned earlier doing some security assessments during actual events, and you talk to staff, and they're really uncertain what they're supposed to be doing, and oftentimes they're concerned about that. I had the opportunity to present to 1,450 ushers, ticket takers, portal workers at a large stadium, and they wanted me to present on See Something, Say Something. And I actually brought in the FBI to do a co-presentation with them. They'll tell you at the end of the day, the questions were not about that. And during that training paid dividends, but the questions were all about, how do I get somebody out of here? I'm concerned. I don't know what the evacuation plan is. I work over here at this gate. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So that told me right there that organization needed to do a training needs assessment and come up with a training plan on how to train those individuals. And we worked through that, and I think we did a very successful job at it. But it's just very important that you know what's the level of training that they've had, and then you can come up with post orders that you actually hand them, maybe even put it on a laminated card so they'll know what to do under certain circumstances. Because that staff member reflects on your organization. So you think about that. If you're at an event, you ask somebody that's wearing a yellow shirt or a red jacket or whatever, however you identify your staff, that person should be able to answer most of the questions they're asked of. And if they can't, that reflects badly on the organization. And then again, back to the first bullet point, this is a thing that I can't overemphasize. You need to know who's working in your venues. Most venues use a concessions company. Oftentimes that's a job is bid. Traditionally, a lot of concessions companies, especially at large events, use a lot of volunteers. You need to know who those individuals are. So if you're selling tickets and issuing credentials and restricting people to go to different places in the venue, and you're letting volunteers come in and you have no idea who they are, that just diminishes the whole security plan right there. So, all employees working this event should have some sort of situational awareness training that really enables them to spot and report unusual or inappropriate behavior. And I talked about just a second ago about doing the see something, say something with employees. That's training that's available that you can really download and present to your employees. And then that training needs to stress that event security is the responsibility of everybody. All employees, just not security and law enforcement, but all employees should be involved in event security. Now, it's not to say that there aren't positions that are directly involved, like law enforcement, fire, medical, private or proprietary security, whichever you use. But additionally, game day management or event operations manager, ushers, ticket takers, all need to be included in the security plan. They all have to know what's going on. I've seen venues that use a command post, but they don't have anybody representing event operations, or they may not have anybody representing the proprietary or even the private security. And it's just like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So it's important everybody is included, and they all need to know what that security plan is. Employees are the greatest vulnerability in information security. So you need some sort of education, training, and awareness program to ensure that all employees understand what information security is. And this could be just as simple as during a non-event day, somebody come up and asking questions about, well, when's the event? How do I get in? And there's certain questions, obviously, that you want to ask as a potential customer, correct? Wanting to know when an event might be. But if they start asking about specific questions about, you know, do you have security 24/7 in the venue and things like that, that individual needs to be identified and maybe somebody follow up with them. But even that, the employee should be trained not to divulge certain information. And then there's proprietary information that the ownership doesn't want to be given out. Information security, very important. Chris, I can't advance the slide. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about access control. An important proactive measure utilized during sports events. It's important that we control not only individuals coming into the venue, and most people think of access control as at the entrance to the venue, at the gate or at the door. Access control really starts further out. And so it's an important protective measure utilized during sports and special events. And most importantly, you need to control vehicles coming into or near your venue, and then again, individuals outside of the venue. And then once inside, you need to access control to certain restricted areas. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about event security perimeters. So think about concentric circles. So concentric circles are seamless circles around your venue. So 3 inner, middle, and outer perimeters. Next slide, please. So an outer perimeter is a secure perimeter such as a buffer zone that's established around the venue to the maximum extent possible. And this is going to vary from venue to venue. If your venue has streets that go all the way around it, excellent buffer zone would be to be able to shut down those streets, make them pedestrian only, limit or control no vehicle traffic is what I highly recommend coming into that buffer zone. And that creates a safe zone, and you're going to have a lot of pedestrians about in there. So the slide says at least 100 feet out from the venue. That was a recommendation that came out from Major League Sports, a document they put together a few years ago. Yeah, but it's going to vary based on the environment around the venue. A lot of venues have parking lots surrounding them. You should still have some standoff distance in the parking lots. Next slide. So next comes the middle perimeter, and this is the first level of access control for staff and patrons that may be coming into the venue. Is oftentimes right at the gate, right at the door, right at the entrance to the venue. And this is at the point where you're going to be looking through their possessions if you do bag searches. And depending on the type of event, you may be doing pat-down searches, that sort of thing. So that establishes the middle perimeter. Next slide. And now the inner perimeter is going to vary from venue to venue and type of event. But for like sports events, the inner perimeter more likely is going to be the playing field and the other areas that are restricted, such as locker rooms, that sort of thing that requires a higher level of credential to get into. For events like concerts, the inner perimeter would be the stage itself, the backstage area, the dressing rooms. That's going to be the inner perimeter. And just take a few seconds here to talk about tickets versus credentials. So a ticket is what gets you into the event and gets you a seat. A credential, and the reason I like to bring this up is oftentimes the process is abused. Credentials are handed out like they're tickets for whatever reason. Credentials should be really controlled. So a credential is something that gets you into a restricted space that not everybody can get into. And credentials should have a hierarchy. So you might need to get on the stage area if you're working there, but you should not be able to get in the dressing room unless you have a need to be there, or maybe even backstage. So the whole gist of it, a ticket gets you in the venue, gets you a seat. A credential is something that's issued to you and gets you in a restricted area because you have a reason or a purpose to be there. Now, I am a proponent of putting photos on credentials and making them as simple as possible. I've seen too many venues that'll have 15 or 20 different types of credentials. You could probably narrow that down to maybe 4 types. The credential looks all the same. It has their photo on it, it has their name on it, and it has the level of access they need, whether it be playing field only, playing field and locker rooms, playing field, locker rooms, and press box. So just something to think about. Now what I'd like to do, get the next slide, please. So I want to give you an example of defense in depth. So we talked about 3 perimeters, the outer, the middle, and the inner. But within each of those perimeters, you can have higher levels of security. So the graphic I have up now is an example of that middle perimeter security. So if you start at the top, and this is going to depend on your intelligence information, your threat vulnerability assessment. It might be some event that you've heard somebody's going to maybe show up and do something. So you decide to put some counter surveillance teams out, maybe plainclothes police officers, plainclothes security officers. So you have counter surveillance, and they're out away from the gate watching who's coming up to the gate. That's your first level of security. Your second level of security is going to be your uniformed security person that may be doing bag checks or pat downs, again, depending on what type of event it is. That's your second level of security. And then next, they're going to go to the ticket taker. The ticket taker should be attuned to what's going on too. They shouldn't be relying on the security person to see everything. So your ticket taker, and next you may have a police officer just inside the gate that's watching, you know, people coming and going inside the gate. So now you're at 4 levels of security already at that middle perimeter. And then you may very well have a CCTV surveillance system, a camera right there at your gate. So that's another level of security. And so that's just defense in depth, and that's just the coordinated use of multiple layers of security to protect an asset, your venue, your stadium. Next slide, please. Okay, Chris, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to you, and then as you mentioned earlier, we're prepared for some questions.
Great, thanks Richard, I appreciate that. And I just want to talk a few minutes about mass notification, and then we'll get to some questions that people have dropped into the chat box here. So we'll get back to Richard in just a moment. But you know, I've spoken with a lot of stadiums and larger venues, arenas, and a lot of you out there have incident management and reporting systems, but you don't necessarily have mass notification systems. And a lot of the stadiums and arenas that I've spoken with recently are considering a mass notification system. And the reason is because they want to provide more coverage in terms of getting notifications out to their employees, to their guests, and other stakeholders during crisis events. So the idea of a mass notification system is that when you post a message, and this could be, you know, maybe it's a bomb threat, maybe it's an active shooter incident, it could be any number of crisis events. The idea is to be able to send out that notification through multiple channels all at once, and in some way, shape, or form, be able to get that message out to the recipients. And Richard made a good point. Sometimes there's going to be failures. Sometimes the PA system might not be working. Sometimes the message may not be able to get out through a text for some reason. So the idea is to have those additional channels of communication. So if you're looking at a mass notification system, what are some of the key requirements you should be looking at when choosing a system? So first, you want to have a system that allows for those multiple communication channels. So that could be text, voice, email, but more importantly, when we're talking about a stadium or arena, we're looking at integrations with third-party systems. So PA systems, LED rings, scoreboards, digital signage boards. A mass notification system should be able to connect with all those third-party systems. Now, a lot of the messages you may send out may be announcement-only messages, and that's fine. But you should have a system as well that enables for two-way communication. So say, for example, you send a message out, and that message is also going to some of your security team. You want your security team to be able to communicate back and forth, especially to coordinate a response to an incident. We talked about the integrations with third-party systems, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a bit. And another requirement when looking at a system should be ease of use. It sounds obvious, but when you have a system and when there's an emergency and you need to post a message, you want a system that's very simple to use, where everything is done on one page. When you compose that message to send it out through multiple channels, it can be done in 10 or 15 seconds. And I'm going to show you firsthand what a mass notification system looks like and what it's like to go through posting a message, so you can see firsthand. Now, a mass notification system ideally should be cloud-based. So in other words, you should be able to access the system through your desktop, your laptop, your smartphone, your tablet. So whether you're at the stadium, arena, your venue, whether you're there, whether you're at home or you're somewhere in between, the platform should be accessible. In terms of the different ways to receive messages, recipients can receive messages via email, a text message, a voice call, a mobile application. If the vendor has a mobile app and the recipients have downloaded a mobile app, the message should be able to flow through the venue's social media pages, and then also those third-party integrations. So again, your PA system, your LED ring, your digital signage boards, your scoreboard. So that message, once it's posted, should be able to connect and go through all those different channels all at once. Now, I want to show you what a platform looks like, what a mass notification platform looks like. So I'm going to give a minute for the proper screen to come up here. You should be able to see what is a post a message page. This happens to be Regroup's mass notification platform. So when you're looking at mass notification platforms, I mentioned one of the key things, key requirements should be ease of use. So ideally, everything to post and send a message should be done on the same page. And I'll scroll down here so you can see the entire page. So again, everything here to post and deliver a message is on the same page. If you see here on the left-hand side, it says post method. So again, an integrated system that allows you to send out a communication through multiple channels. So email, text message, a voice call, a mobile application if the vendor has a mobile app associated with the system, an RSS feed that can go through post to your website and then also to your digital signage boards, your scoreboard. And then down below you see other integrations, so maybe your PA system as well. So once you've established which communication channels, if not all, that you want to send the notification through, then you select the group or groups that you're sending the message to. So in this case, I'll choose a group, ABC Stadium, General Alerts. So this message is going to go out to everybody that is in the system, employees, key stakeholders, security personnel, and then anybody in the stadium or arena or venue that has opted into the system. So I'm going to scroll down here and show you where you can actually input the message. So you can write a free-form message here. This is an alert, and you can see the message gets populated into the text message portion. But ideally, a mass notification system should give you the ability to create templates, canned templates that you can associate with any sort of critical or even non-critical event. Here I'm going to choose a template which says there is a potential bomb threat and gives an evacuation alert. You can see here it has the message and then also allows you to embed a map. So again, a system that allows for canned messages but also allowing you to embed images into the message. I'm going to scroll down here a little further. You can see the message is getting input, the canned template, automatically into the text message portion. At this point, the message is ready to post. So in just seconds, we've gone ahead and we've created an emergency alert going out through multiple communication channels that goes out in just seconds. So the idea is that, again, in some way, shape, or form, guests in the stadium, guests in the venue, security personnel, employees, other key stakeholders are receiving the message in just seconds. And again, having the ability for two-way communication so security and safety personnel can coordinate a response. Now, I talked about emergencies, but obviously there's a lot of use cases for venues to use this for day-to-day usage as well. So I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one at any point about how Assistant can be used beyond emergency notification as well. With that, I want to get back to Richard. Well, first, actually, let me get back to the presentation. I want to mention that both Richard and myself are available for one-on-one consultations with you in regards to whether it's mass notification or regarding event management and security. So I'll leave this contact information up here so you can reference that, jot it down. We'll also be sending the presentation out, so you'll have that in hand in the next day or two. With that, we do have a couple questions that came through. So if Richard wants to come off mute, I'm going to ask him a couple questions that some of you have asked. Richard, the first one that we have here is, what are the current emerging threats to our venues?
Well, Chris, I think for the most part, we've done a good job securing our venues. We've hardened the targets. But really what we're seeing is the bad guys are going after soft targets. And we'll talk a little bit about terrorism, but that is what the emerging threat is. So ISIS is inspiring people by telling them, hey, you don't have to come to Syria. You can just get a vehicle and run over people. We've seen that. We've seen that in this country. I used to work at the Ohio State University, and unfortunately, just a few months ago, we've seen an incident there. They're also inspiring them by telling them, hey, you don't have to go out and buy a gun. It's easier just to get a knife or some sort of edged weapon and cut people and kill people. The recent incident at the concert in Manchester is a good example about going after the softer target. They couldn't, I'm not certain if he couldn't get in the venue, but the softer target was as people was leaving the venue after it was over to go after those individuals. And then incident in Paris at the stadium, now there was multiple incidents around the same time, but the particular incident in the stadium, that individual tried to actually get in the stadium, and he couldn't, and I've actually met and talked to the security officer that was working that night that actually just wouldn't let the guy in because he did his job. The guy did not have a ticket. He didn't really have that second gut instinct that something wasn't right. Initially, he just would not allow him in the stadium, so he went away, but he watched him. He went down to another gate, and that's when he got that instinct, hey, something's not right. But that guy still had the opportunity to go after the softer target. He couldn't get in the venue, so he blew himself out outside the target. So I think just a follow-up question to that is should be how should venues address this issue? I don't think you can take the stance that once the venue's over and people have left, is it actually over? The big question is how far out do you extend security from your venue, and whose responsibility is it? That's all going to be based going back to that planning, risk management, threat and vulnerability. Again, Manchester happened after the event was over, but it was just outside the venue, and it was actually in some connecting corridor, I believe. So if somebody's left a venue and the event is ended and something happens, that's going to be forever tied to your venue, though. So it's a big reputational issue. We will always think about that issue as the Mariana Grande concert in Manchester. So good start on this, I think, is pushing your outer perimeter out even further. And once the event ended, security is not over yet until everybody's gone. So hope that answers that question.
Okay, great. We have one more question, Richard. So do you see, in light of recent events, that venues are increasing their budgets for safety and security, or they're getting the sign-off for increasing their budget?
Yes and no. So I've talked to some individuals recently, both in the state of Georgia and actually just a few days ago in New York. Some people are seeing that. Some people are getting that. I always personally went after the free resources, and there's a lot of free resources out there. A lot of the federal money had kind of dried up. I was fortunate when I worked at Ohio State, we were in an urban area security initiative area, and there was funding available. You had to articulate a need and a reason, but that was all about equipment that was shared in the area. Again, it's back to that risk. The greatest risk is not doing anything at all. So I guess, Chris, I can't answer that 100%, but I have talked to some people that are getting increases. What I'm seeing a lot of is smaller venues that where the security manager or director, whatever the title may be, was really a secondary position. Oftentimes an event operations person wore that second hat as security, and they kind of manage the security because it does kind of go hand in hand. And I'm talking about smaller like theaters and even small arenas, but now they're actually hiring somebody specifically to direct the security process. So the answer there would be yes, they're putting more money into it. They've actually hired somebody to address their security needs.
Okay, great. Thanks, Richard. We have a couple questions regarding or related to mass notification that I'll respond to, and then we'll wrap things up here. The first is, how can stadium guests receive text messages or alerts or mobile app alerts through the mass notification system? So that's a good question. So obviously guests will have to subscribe to receive text alerts, or they'll have to download the mobile app to receive push notifications when you're sending out a message. So there's different ways stadiums are doing that. They're publicizing on their digital signage boards that people can download the mobile app, or they're publicizing that attendees can actually text a number that will enable them to join a group in the stadium to receive emergency alerts, for example. And then beyond emergency alerts, that can be used for other messages too. It could be used for sending those subscribers or people who have the mobile app information on promotions at concession stands and things like that. So it can be used for, again, emergencies or non-critical messages. And then there's one other question that's kind of related to that, which is I heard that stadium and arenas might be able to send out WIA alerts. Do you know anything about that? So That's a good question, and that is tied into the previous question because it can be difficult sometimes getting stadium attendees to subscribe, to receive alerts, or download the mobile app. So wheel alerts are actually wireless emergency alerts, and they're through FEMA's iPause system, which is an integrated public alert warning system. So the benefit of this is that anybody in your stadium who has a mobile device and you're able to send out a WIA message, they'll receive that message like a text message, but without subscribing to anything or without having to download anything. So there's an advantage to that. Now, as a stadium or arena or large venue, there's some steps that you have to take to be able to send out WIA alerts. The first is that you need a mass notification provider that has partnered with FEMA and is an iPause originator. And then secondly, you have to apply to FEMA to become an alerting authority. Couldn't get that out of my mouth. So again, I think it's a great idea if stadiums and arenas and larger venues look at that option. That could work alongside a notification system really well. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions offline. Anybody wants to follow up regarding that. That's all that we have today. We're just about at the end here. So I want to say thank you to Richard Moorman from Concentric Risk Solutions for joining us and presenting today. On behalf of him and Regroup Mass Notification, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact Richard or myself. Thank you all and have a great day.